the value is going to come from you spending time to build out templates for like everything that you do. If you can really systematize your business in your tool, which again, that's where tech comes into play. Some systems have the ability for you to build templates. Some don't. Some focus on other areas. Like that is what really drives the value in that, is by having those systems, having those processes that ultimately are going to make that give you the features and benefits that was promised in that sales process.
Well, welcome, Jeff. It's so great to have you here. For those of you who don't know, Jeff just recently welcomed twins into the world. So that was a very quick and easy connection for us, being twin dads all the way. Let's go.
Let's go.
So good. But yeah, Jeff, thanks so much for taking some time and talking a little bit about ZenPilot and what you guys got going on over there. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Tony. And I've had to reschedule this so many times with Tony because of the twins, so it's great to connect on that, but I feel bad. But we're here, we're doing this, so I'm super excited to be here, Tony. I appreciate you inviting me on the show.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I've been a fan from afar. For people who may be familiar with you, for people who aren't familiar with you, you guys do excellent work on YouTube. In fact, as I've been exploring ClickUp, because that's our project management tool of choice, I think you guys are probably the number 1 or number 2 ranked ClickUp YouTube channel, or like the content that you guys put out there is usually always the first that come up in my feed when I look for things on YouTube. So you're doing great. I know you're the head of growth over there, or head of marketing over there. So whatever you're doing, it's working. I love it. But we're going to be diving in today about a little bit about ClickUp and also kind of what you guys are up to with ZenPilot, because I know you guys do a lot of work with agencies specifically. So, I think maybe the thing that's top of mind for me right now is when we think about operations platforms, I actually was just advising one of my clients on this about what should the tool of choice be for them as they're moving now into kind of a growth mode. I think a lot of times I see agencies stuck paying for really expensive tools. It almost feels like either they manage their whole agency on a spreadsheet, or they're going for a really, really expensive kind of Cadillac product. Yeah. So why do you think most agencies end up falling into the trap of working more with those really expensive tools?
Yeah, it's a good question. I feel like, nowadays tech has a promise that it's going to solve all of your problems. Like you go through the sales process, whether this is project management software, whether this is account-based marketing software, which I was in that industry for a while, or really anything. And it's like, you go through that sales process and they're going to promise you this, this, and this, like all the benefits. But tech, honestly, when you jump into it, obviously it's amazing. Like that's why they do super well. That's why tech really helps us perform our jobs better. But ultimately, a lot of them are blank canvases. And so people don't really think about the fact that, like, especially in project management software, you jump into it and there's nothing there. Like there's a lot of bells and whistles and things that you can use, but ultimately you have to design the system in there if you're actually going to get any use out of it. And so like ultimately you can get in there and it's going to be nothing more than a spreadsheet. Spreadsheets have been amazing for so long with all the calculations you can do in it. But again, it's a blank canvas. There's a lot of things you can do in it, but you really have to think about like, what does success look like in here? What are we actually trying to accomplish? And from there, design that system. And so that's why people fall into it, because maybe they start off with a less expensive option, a less expensive project management tool, and it's not working for them. So they're like, maybe I got to pay a little bit more money to actually make this work for my team because, this one has a workload view or the Gantt view. And so they keep pushing into that, but they're like, oh, wait, this workload view is great. It's there. It gives me that UI capability. But again, I have to actually build in there to make that workload view or something like that actually populate. And so that's why I think it's a lot of over indexed into expensive tech, because people think it's going to solve all of their problems. But ultimately, it's the build, it's the strategy, it's the system that makes all of it work.
I'm glad that you mentioned that, because I see that in, honestly, even my own business is we can be sold this big bill of goods that, the tech is the thing to solve the problems. But, even what you're saying here is at the end of the day, it's how you guys strategize. It's how you go about building these things up. And you said you even see that when people go with these expensive solutions, they are still spending as much, if not more time trying to have things set up the way that they need it to be set up in their business. Is that right?
Yeah. And so with project management, like you got to build an operating system. You got to build like the processes. Like a lot of people, just a small example, like ClickUp, especially, that's what we're used to, is like you can put a task in there, put a bunch of tasks in there, but if it doesn't have due dates or it's assigned to a bunch of people, it's not going to really do anything. Like you really need to have The value is going to come from you spending time to build out templates for like everything that you do. If you can really systematize your business in your tool, which again, that's where tech comes into play. Some systems have the ability for you to build templates. Some don't. Some focus on other areas. Like that is what really drives the value in that, is by having those systems, having those processes that ultimately are going to make that give you the features and benefits that was promised in that sales process. So that's what I've noticed a lot with a lot of different firms. I jump in, I audit their system, and they're like, we don't really have that much set up. We're just kind of putting in a bunch of stuff randomly. And I'm like, well, if you don't have the right spot for a task to go and it's just being in a private list or something like that, you're going to have a lot of headaches and not get the visibility or whatever you're looking for in the beginning part of your process.
Well, and so it sounds like, even though you guys are a ClickUp, you primarily work on ClickUp for the project management. What I'm hearing you say is you wouldn't necessarily think that ClickUp on its own is necessarily going to solve your project management issues.
Right. And we're not tied to one tool. Like ClickUp has just been the tool of choice based off of the system that we build and like how they've constructed it with their hierarchy and views and template features that are available in the system. But it's like ultimately the technology, whatever, you can use ClickUp, you can use Asana, Monday, Rike, Teamwork, whatever it is. There's going to be pros and cons to each platform, but it's really the processes and the habits, which we'll probably get into more in this episode, that are ultimately going to make that work. Like I can have a really good piece of technology, but if my team is using it inconsistently, or some people are using it and some aren't, or it's just different across different departments, even if it's the best project management system in the world, it's still probably not going to work for you.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm digging this idea of also playing some devil's advocate. So if I might just like spar a little bit with this idea, this concept, and I've heard this actually a lot in my space, in the accounting firm space. There's a particular LinkedIn influencer who I adore. I think he's amazing, but he came out and said essentially, you really need to focus on industry tech, industry specific tech for your project management. We call it practice management for us. And his reasoning was, it's going to be better tailored and tooled for your specific needs in this industry. Because the concern is if you go with something like ClickUp, which he was on for a while, you are going to end up having basically needing to constantly get in there and retool and tailor and fix things, because it's kind of somewhat held together by duct tape. Like, what would you say to somebody who's presenting that argument for why we wouldn't go with something like ClickUp? We should go with something much more expensive and industry specific.
I mean, that's where it's like in the sales process, it's all about discovery to figure out like, what do you actually need and what do you actually want? Because if you're not doing a good job identifying like, what is actually like, what are we trying to get out of this tool? Like sometimes for ClickUp, like, yeah, there's Teamwork, there's Productives. Those are great tools that are hyper focused on agencies. The benefit for that is, as you know, like if you have a distinct ICP and that's all you're going after, every feature, everything that you put out in the tech or that service is going to be for that specific industry, which gives you a huge leg up when it comes to competing against your competitors, because you're building like agencies. They need to be able to view profitability by clients or projects. They need to be able to see utilization. They need to be able to invoice. They need to be able to see sort of how we're pacing on the specific project towards the budget that we've set. And like a Teamwork or Productive, they solve those challenges, but they're going to lack in some other areas where like ClickUp, sometimes those tools that are not focused specifically on a niche have bigger budgets. They're going to have a broader, more robust like timeline for their actual features that they're going to release. So it's like, I don't know, it's really discovering what you actually need, what you're trying to get out of that tool. And especially now, like this is such a competitive industry with project management systems. There's like probably a new one coming out every single day that's raising a bunch of money because everyone needs a project management system. It's like a very good industry probably to be in overall. And a lot of those systems are doing great, but it's really figuring out like what you need and what you want that's going to lead to the system. Because I guess a big part of that is a lot of those industry focused tech pieces are not as like customizable. They're more of like you're stuck to a specific way of using it. That's what I've noticed with especially the ones for agencies, versus some of them are very much more customizable, which gives you a lot of creative freedom to build unique things. Like ClickUp, we can build a CRM system in it. We can build a applicant tracking system. We can build out an out of office manager. Like there's a lot of different things that you can build in it because it's gives you that creative freedom, versus industry tech sometimes is more very focused on the way that you use it, which again, could be a good thing, could be a bad thing, but it really ultimately is decided on what you actually need and want, and what is going to be defined by like, what is your success definition for that ultimately?
Yeah. I like the point you made though about something like a ClickUp or something of a broader, a bigger tool having a little bit more of a budget to afford some of these more cutting edge feature sets.
Yeah.
Whereas something that's maybe more industry specific might not have as much funding. They might be maybe a little bit behind the eight ball in terms of their R&D, because quite frankly, they just don't have the capitalization to afford some of those features. I mean, have you, having been in this space for a while, and specifically with ClickUp, have you already noticed some of those areas where ClickUp or a tool like ClickUp that's more generalist in nature is outperforming or much more competitive on the new feature set compared to industry tools? So are there some examples that you can think of where
Yeah,
that's
I
the
mean,
case?
ClickUp has definitely been a tool that they launch features faster than any tool I've ever seen. Like each week they're coming out with new features, and you can look at their YouTube channel. I think they're all out there, Reddit, wherever. And it's like new feature after new feature. They have a great like handy board for you to submit things, and they continue. And like everyone has an opinion of like, I want this, this, and this, but they do a good job of listening to their customers there. But I mean, it really all depends. I haven't seen like ClickUp oftentimes is going to win deals, just being that like again it's super customizable, but I don't think they necessarily like they will beat out like some of those tools don't have sprints. If you're an agency that wants to run in sprints, you might not be able to do that in others. And so there's things like that it's like very, again, because they're super broad and not super niched, they do have some grounds that they can win in that. But with like us, we've noticed that ClickUp is not necessarily solving the profitability question, that reporting for agencies that they don't so desperately need. And so we've had to sort of build that out on our own to give agencies that specific reporting. And so that's been kind of the one thing, like they have partners and they want to work with partners because your partners are great for them to then focus on a specific niche to help build the use case in that niche. So that's kind of why ZenPilot has been successful, is because we focused on agencies and build out a platform in ClickUp for agencies with the reporting as well to help make them more competitive in maybe a ClickUp versus Teamwork or a ClickUp versus Productive type deal.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, so they're leveraging these partners like ZenPilot to be able to address the more industry specific niches. And maybe on that note, something that could be helpful for our listeners to hear is like the story behind ZenPilot. Like you guys obviously are now at a spot where you're primarily providing, implementation and kind of more consulting to get things set up right in ClickUp. But it hadn't always been that way for ZenPilot, right? Like you guys have a little bit of a different background and history.
Yeah, so the story of ZenPilot starts off like a while ago. Gray McKenzie and Andrew Dimsky, they're the two founders of ZenPilot, and they went to college together. And in college, in their dorm room, they basically started an agency. And so they were on like the early end of HubSpot when HubSpot was all about inbound, and they were kind of one of the early adopters in their partner program. And so they were really focused on that side of the house. Like they had their own marketing agency, started getting clients, started growing and doing everything that an agency does. And from that, they felt the same pains that every agency has. They started to get a lot of clients, but weren't able to necessarily service them all that well. They had to make hiring decisions. They had to figure out how they could do better handoffs, how they could resource better, how they could determine how profitable they were to really be better at pricing projects and defining their ICP. And so all of that, they're like, at that point, there wasn't as many project management systems. Like at that point, when they were working, this is like back in 2010, ClickUp didn't even exist. And so they decided like, hey, we need a system that's going to help us manage our projects, manage a large scaling team that's remote, that like we need to pass work back and forth to really build realistic timelines for our clients and actually deliver work on time, manage all that, see where we are overall. And so they decided like, hey, let's have this agency, but let's start building our own project management system that's built specifically for agencies and that specific agency use case. And so they started building the system out. It was called Do Inbound, based off of HubSpot Inbound. And so they started building that for a while. And when they were doing that, they realized like, okay, we can give a very specific focused agency project management tool that's like built for how agencies run. But ultimately what they realize is like, what actually makes this work is the process side and the habit side. Because even if they got a team in there, if the team just kind of added tasks ad hoc or their team wasn't using consistently, it didn't work. So they started adding on some services to their tech to say like, hey, let's help people on the process side. Let's help them build out their onboarding process, build out sort of like how we can hand off from different teams or how we can actually plan out work better and resource better. So from there, essentially, they started doing that. But then as they kept going, they realized like, hey, we're trying to bootstrap this. And now we're getting into the time when project management systems were like super funded because everyone knew like, okay, this is a really good market to be in. And so then it came to the point where like ClickUps came in and all the other like Mondays. And I mean, Asana was there for a while, but all those systems had so much more money to build such a much better system that they might have had. So they decided like, okay, we ultimately realized that the foundational problems are like the consulting side. We need to help agencies on their processes. We need to help them on their habits and also set up of the structure to build really that operating system. So it came down to it where they decided like, hey, let's not do the tech side of things. Let's start a sort of operational consulting business and let's try to find a project management system that works well with what we're trying to build. And so they basically evaluated like 71, 72 different systems at that point to figure out like, okay, who has a good hierarchy for agencies and the visibility that they need for like account managers, project managers, leadership, things like that. And ultimately they came down to say like, hey, ClickUp is a great partner of ours to build what we're trying to build inside of the system. And so from there, we've been a partner with ClickUp ever since. That was like 2018 when ClickUp was first coming around, and we were one of the first partners with ClickUp. And since then, it's been great. Just not having to worry about the tech side and worrying about like, hey, let's build the systems inside of the tech. ClickUp is just the tool of choice that we use.
Yeah, that's so cool. And I think in that story, something that's resonating with me is, I want to say it was Marcel Petitpas who said this, but basically that he's quite bullish and believes that services are going to make a big comeback or are already starting to make a big comeback in the tech space because of exactly what you're talking about here. You get these platforms that are a really great foundational element, like a ClickUp, but then ultimately it's in the kind of custom tailoring of that particular product that really makes something like that shine. And it's still a lot more affordable than creating something completely custom or completely from scratch. I don't know if that's been something that you guys have, as you guys have grown, if that's your intention behind this.
Yeah, I mean, in the service industry, like I've been in it for basically my whole career, and like I've been on the ABM side, and ABM is one of those. It's like there's all these ABM techs out there, and so this is why there's so many now agencies that are being born out of like, I need to help people with their go-to-market strategy. I need to help people with account-based marketing, is because people think, hey, I can get a piece of account-based marketing software and it has all this, like I can run ads from it, I can target specific accounts, but like you need an overall overarching strategy. And that's where the service people, that's why agencies exist, is because they're there to help people really build the strategy to make that software successful. And that's why software companies are partnering with service providers, because ultimately they can help them get more use to, for them to have better retention on their platforms regardless. And so that's kind of where like we've had a good relationship with ClickUp, because we can ultimately help them get more out of the platform to not churn. And ClickUp is great with that for that reason. And so it's like, it's definitely something we've noticed, but like, especially with agencies, they're so good at marketing, but like most agencies are born from a really smart marketer that knows how to grow other businesses. They just have a very good creative mind with that. But then they dive into it, they start doing freelance, and then all of a sudden they are like, I have too many clients. They hire one person, two people, three people, 10 people, 20 people, and they're like, they're not as good on the business side. Or like, even for you, like the accounting side, like they don't have necessarily all of that ideas or like ways of doing that. And so especially on the ops side, that's not necessarily everyone's bread and butter. And so that's kind of how we've been able to jump in and help you take care of growing your business. You take care of building out what you do, your processes, and we'll help sort of build and put all that together.
Yeah. Well, and that's a good segue point, because something that's I'm curious to go back to is you were talking about it's not necessarily the tool itself that really is the main challenge or the main issue. The main issue at hand is a lack of process, is a lack of foundational elements on which to then use the technology. So would you mind unpacking a little bit more about ZenPilot's system that you guys use for your clients that ultimately help them break free of this inefficiency and like kind of lack of organization?
Yeah, so our system is kind of driven by, we have like a couple of different components to it. We always start with like our 1-3-5 formula, which is ultimately like our way of actually implementing ClickUp or really any project management software. And so to dive into that 1-3-5 formula, the one ultimately stands for the goal, which is is clarity. And so that's clarity for all. It's at different levels of the organization. So like you may come to us, oftentimes people are looking for clarity maybe at the leadership level. They don't know what their team is doing. They don't know how profitable they are by each client or project. They don't know how well their team is utilized. But you also have your account managers who are, or account project managers, whatever that hybrid role might be for a lot of agencies. They don't know like how well their clients are doing, or like where all those timelines actually are at any given moment in time. And they need to be able to see that. In addition, they don't know like how much workload is on each people's plates. They're not able to resource effectively. And so there's a bunch of different levels within that. Also, like individual contributors don't know the work that's on their plate on a daily basis. And from that too stems the clients. Your clients need to know what you're doing as well. And so like ultimately you're trying to get clarity for at least one level in the organization, hopefully all the levels in the organization. And so that's the goal. After that is sort of the three keys of how we're going to get there. And so in order to get there, again, most people focus on the technology. They think the technology is going to solve all their problems, but that's really only one piece to it, is the tools. The second component to that is the processes that you run as a business. We want to make sure those are well documented. This is not just like, hey, let's go build out a ton of really detailed standard operating procedures and say, hey, we're good there. Like we ultimately want to get that process, that SOP in the system for where it actually needs to be, like in front of people. So we always say the process needs to live where the work gets done. As you do all this, as you hire people, you want to have the work in one system directly connected to that process for how to complete that work so that your team actually does it and you have processes that are followed by all. So that's another component too that's going to make it work. In addition, the piece that holds all of this together is the habits. And so this is change management with project management systems. You need to make sure that your team is excited about the tool, or they're at least using it effectively. They're all using it in a similar way. And so we want to create cultures of accountability. And habits are, again, the glue that holds it together. They're oftentimes the piece that people miss or skip. When I have discovery calls with people, I'm able to really diagnose that, like, hey, you're talking about all these different things. It's really a team habit problem. You got people that are not using it the right way, but that's also probably because you didn't set the firm levels of like, these are our expectations. This is where we're going to communicate. This is how we're going to prioritize your work. This is how we're going to complete our work. You need to make sure that everyone has clarity on that so that you can hold them accountable to that. And so there's a lot of things with that. We need to make sure we're training the team on how to actually use it, but as well as those expectations. And so it's one goal, clarity. And then we have the three keys. We have tools, processes, and habits that get us there. And in terms of the steps that we take teams through, it's 5 steps: design, build, train, launch, and optimize. So brief overview: design, we want to build out that strategy, build out that solution for what we're trying to actually get that all built out in like a Miro board, or just have that written down for clarity for everyone on what that's going to look like. Then we actually go and start building it. Like, what are the integrations that we need to have in our system? What's the additional tech that we're going to need there? What are the processes that we actually need to build out? And then once you actually get it built out and ready to go, now we need to train the team, again, on the software, as well as the expectations. After we have the team trained, we're going to launch. We don't want to do like a bunch of soft launches and kind of have people half in a system, half not. We want to make sure everyone is sort of coming on Monday. We're going to be in this new system because we want to build a single source of truth. So we're going to launch on one day. And then after that is really, once you get all the data in there, once you're able to build that system that's going to give you the data, now what do we do with it? We want to make sure that we're taking that and looking at it on a daily basis to capture where there's bad habits or good habits in there. But we also want to use it like time estimates versus time tracked. If you're tracking your time, that is such good data for an agency owner to have. That's going to help you determine profitability. That's also going to help you determine how long things take so that we can resource better in the future. Because now I know like how long this project actually takes, and I can scope that out better. And so ultimately we want to take that and then figure out, okay, how can we actually optimize this from what we've actually built? And that's just kind of an ongoing cycle from there. So the 1-3-5 formula, that's kind of what we lead teams through to actually get ClickUp or whatever project management software it is actually up and running for their team.
Yeah, I love that. As you were talking, I was taking some copious notes. That's what I was doing, writing over here. So I do have a couple questions. I wanted to kind of dive in here on the 1-3-5, just to kind of help this kind of resonate. So I guess maybe just an overall comment is, it sounds to me as we kind of dive into this, there's a lot of kind of echo to something like an EOS or something like a kind of a management methodology. And would you guys say that this is kind of the other side of the same coin of something like EOS, or how do you guys view that?
Yeah, and we actually run on EOS, and EOS has been amazing for our business because it's a way, again, to hold your team accountable, to create that culture of accountability. It's ultimately like Yeah, EOS does a great job of like having that quarterly pacing. And so like that's a great way we want to break things down. Like they break down into rocks. You have like 1 year, 3 year, 10 year sort of goals there, and then break it down into quarterly initiatives and then break that down into smaller bite-sized pieces. So it's kind of like in a similar fashion. EOS is more of like they call it the operating system. And I love how they market and how like all of it is broken down into like specific tools for specific functions. Then you bring it all together. Like I kind of mimic a lot of our marketing off of them. But yeah, it's a lot of the same. Ultimately, the goal for EOS and the goal for what we're trying to build is clarity. Like we always say, clarity is kindness. The more clarity you can give people in the organization, especially in remote environments where people are at their computers all day, and like we don't want someone to come into work and be like, what am I supposed to do today? Like the more you can give clarity to the business at each level in the organization, the better off you're ultimately going to be, because it's so helpful for people. It makes people excited. It makes people like, especially with project management systems where people don't necessarily like, if you have a lot of tasks in there, some people don't like using it. Some people don't like time tracking, but the more you can kind of say like, hey, we're building this for you. Like, especially with time tracking, what I always tell people is if your team doesn't want to track time, you can tell them like, you got to reframe the pitch of how you're pitching it, because oftentimes if you tell them ultimately, like if you track your time each and every day on these tasks, that's going to help us understand how long this work actually takes, so that when it comes to resourcing you in the future, so that we don't overwhelm you, we're going to be able to do that better because we have the data to know, hey, this blog post took 5 hours instead of we maybe thought it was going to take 3. And now I'm not going to overwhelm you with that work because I have the data to know how long things take. So it's like a lot of that. But yeah, ultimately, I mean, clarity is kindness is the ultimate summary I can give here, or you can provide that. That's what EOS does. That's what we try to do. Yeah. It's going to help out a lot.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people will resonate, whether or not they're using EOS. I know a lot of people will kind of implement their own version of EOS or something like EOS Lite. But I love that you guys are thinking that way, and even how you guys structure it. So the 1 goal, the 3 keys, and the 5 steps. Diving into the keys, I think maybe something that would be helpful for me and maybe the listeners too is, okay, so you said the 3 keys is the tools, the processes, and the habits. How would you differentiate between the processes and the habits? Because in my mind, I feel like the processes, if they're adhered to, like maybe that's what the habits are, but yeah, how would you clarify the difference between processes and habits?
Yeah, I mean, they do like it all is going to come together in the end, but it's like you can have really good processes, like you can have really good SOPs, you can have really good templates inside of your project management system where all of that is coming together. But like ultimately, if your team does not follow that, or they're not like for an example, let's say you have a very detailed template for how you do a website project. And so within that template, you have all the tasks with due dates in there, time estimates, and everything that's going to make the system go smoothly. Your team sees that. They see their work on a daily basis. But if your team is not going in there, like this is where the habits come to play. If your team is not going in there and like using due dates as a way to prioritize their work or try to get work done that day, if they're just using it as a suggestion and they're not using it to say like, hey, I need to do this by this time, ultimately that's where it's going to break. Even the best process with bad habits is not going to help your team. You need to have the habits to say like, hey, my team I know is going to do their best. Sometimes obviously things get pushed because that happens in agency life. Higher priority items come in, but like we need our team to go by that due date driven methodology. We need our team to communicate in the same place. We need our team to use statuses in a similar way, because ultimately if they don't and everyone is coming in and using the system differently, it's not going to work out, because then it's like, I can't trust that if I tell the client, hey, we're going to finish this phase of the project by November 14th, if I can't trust that my team is going to follow the timeline that I've put in front of them, then ultimately you're not going to provide a realistic timeline for your clients. And so that habits is really, again, that glue that makes the processes and the technology actually work.
Yeah. And you can't necessarily have the habits unless you have a clearly defined process, because the habit is the adherence to that kind of that structure. And maybe this is something you already touched on, but when you guys go through and you're working on this 1-3-5 kind of framework, do you see it somewhat as, all right, we're going to start with the 1 first, and then we're going to move to the 3 and then the 5? Do you see it kind of in a linear progression?
I mean, a little bit. I think like in our process, we always start with, as I said, like that design stage where it's like, we're kind of blueprinting what the solution is going to look like. And from there is ultimately like figuring out what those underlying issues are. Cause sometimes it isn't habits. Like sometimes you have an amazing team, but you don't have any processes or like you can have an amazing team, I think, especially in the early stages, that doesn't need anything, and you can just trust everyone and they're going to do a great job. And that's fine. So some teams are blessed with that. But like we always start off with surveying the entire organization on both like a qualitative and quantitative fashion. So we want to make sure we're understanding like what are people's daily habits? What do they feel like is working and not working? Because we ultimately want to figure out like, is this a habits problem? Is this a process problem? Is this a tools problem? Because sometimes it's one of the three, sometimes it's all of it. I mean, ultimately it's a three-legged stool. If one leg of the stool breaks, we're flopping. We're not going to do all that well. So it is like part of our process in that design, build, train, launch, and optimize is focused on like just one or two of those elements as we go through there. But like through all of it, you're kind of like, I mean, the train stage and the launch stage, a lot of that's going to be habits as opposed to the build and design stage.
Yeah.
Because that's where you're really getting your team involved in it. And like, that's where you're going to uncover, do we have good habits within the system through that? And so, yeah, there is kind of two pillars for each of those stages that help us there. But
well, and so from my experience, I back in my corporate days, we got to be a part of what we called the change enablement team.
Yeah.
We were working on implementing a huge software solution for our global finance function. And one of the things I learned in doing that, because we worked very closely with a big consulting firm, learned a ton from that. It was super interesting. But we talked about change enablement, we talked about change management. And honestly, I mean, if we're being honest, I think that's where a lot of organizations fall short, is in their ability to navigate through it used to be this and now it's this. And so a lot of times from what I've seen, you'll still have those people who are always early adopters and, on the cutting edge. They're going to be they want to do the change no matter what, because they just like the new thing. But the vast majority of people are going to be like, I don't know about this. So I guess what role does ZenPilot play in that training and that kind of change management aspect of bringing in a new project management software?
Yeah, so definitely a couple of different components within it. Like the first one, as I mentioned, like during the first initial stage of our process is getting the team involved. Because like ultimately, like I've been in project management implementations where like on my side where like our team was not involved in the process at all. And it was clearly like, hey, we're just going to have the leadership team build what they want so that they can get the data out of us. And so like you can clearly kind of see that as like an individual contributor or someone that's like a little bit lower level of like, this is not supposed to serve me. And so we want to get the team involved early on so that they can voice their opinions. I always tell people oftentimes this is like, you have different personalities. As you said, like there's going to be early adopters and things like that. But like there's also different personalities when it comes to like where they're comfortable sharing their opinions. Some people want a survey, like that wants to be anonymous. I just like to fill this out and I'm going to share my opinions there. Sometimes it's a full team meeting where they're the one that's more extrovert and they're going to be like, hey, I'm going to share this in front of everyone because that's what I like to do. I want to get my voice to be heard. Other people want one-on-one meetings or like smaller level interviews, and that's helpful for them. So you want to make sure you get everyone's feedback. And so you need multiple avenues for that. So again, forms, surveys, you have one-on-one meetings, you have full team meetings. That's kind of your way to get all of that out. And so that's kind of what we perform during our process to then help sort of like get their voices to be heard. And then after that piece to it, like ultimately the leadership team or whoever is like in charge of the implementation, they need to make the decisions. So like you're going to have a lot of different opinions, but ultimately there needs to be a decision. You can't serve everyone in every single way. You ultimately got to say, hey, this is what we're doing. But from there, as we do it, we also want the team to always know the timeline. Like one of the examples we always give is like the Domino's pizza tracker. Like, at each level where we're at with this pizza. Like, did the order just go in? Did they put it in the oven? Is it ready to go? Like, they give you a clear timeline for where we're at so that like I'm not nervous about like, oh, is it coming now? Is it coming now? It's like, it's much easier. You always provide, again, clarity is kindness, theme of this episode. But from there, so we want to give everyone an idea of the timeline. And then from our perspective, like we always, a couple of different ways of doing this is before we're going to launch, we tell people, hey, we're going to launch in 2 or so weeks. We're getting ready to go. And you can bring people in that like maybe do some little testing to figure it out a little bit. But like ultimately we want to provide training, pre-recorded training, as well as live training. Those two things work hand in hand. The pre-recorded helps people like watch it, whether they want to watch it fast or watch it over and over again, have split screen to sort of test things out as they go. But then the full team training is ways for you to reinforce what the people learned in that. So it's like also helps people have more higher level questions, higher level conversations, because they have a good context for it, because they're not just going in straight to a live call and being way overwhelmed, being like, what the heck is going on? So a lot of that helps too with that. So that, again, we lead to those higher level conversations. But ultimately it's getting them certified in a training course, training them live for some Q&A, walking through scenarios, but then also doing role specific calls. Like there's a bunch of different use cases, ways people are going to use the system. We want to make sure everyone's comfortable with, hey, this is how you're going to do your job. This is how you're going to do your job. And so again, giving people, setting those expectations for this is how we're going to do it. Always make sure your expectations are written down firmly in a document, signed, sealed, and delivered for the team so that they know this is what you're going to be held accountable for. Again, clarity is kindness. I'll say that over and over again. But from there, again, that's what then, once you build that system, you can hold them accountable to that after you're actually launched.
That's so good. Well, I want to just call this out for a minute. We're asking about how do you go about training, or like what role do you play in training and change management? And I love that the first thing you said was you get people involved at the beginning, because that's one of the big kind of aha moments I had working on this change management group is the impact of what I'd call co-authorship, where you're bringing people in, you're inviting them to co-author the solution, whether or not their voice is going to be the voice that ultimately produces the end result. The fact that you've now given them a platform and you've invited them to join you in creating the solution, the buy-in is going to be so much more at the very beginning, because they feel like it's something that I get to own.
Yeah. And like everyone wants their voice to be heard, like whether or not, again, you're going to listen to, you'll listen to it, but ultimately if it's going to lead to the final decision or not, like you can't serve everyone, as I said, in every sort of capacity. But like, I think one of the most helpful things in our process for people has been like in that, because we've worked with like over 3,000 different agencies, we've been able to take like all of those surveys and basically put it in like a benchmark, because again, one of it's on part of the survey is like a 1 to 5 scale. Part of it's very open-ended. So you get sort of both avenues of feedback there. And so the 1 to 5, we're able to kind of say like most agencies are at this level based off everyone that we've surveyed, and you're at this level. You're a big drop in terms of like the team knowing what they need to do on every single day. Why do you think that is? And so we always take that and have a conversation with the leadership team. And sometimes it leads to really good conversations of like, oh crap, like we did not know that. Like it's good for us to understand like how our team is actually feeling, because we thought that was actually one of our strengths, and sometimes it's not. So it's helpful to see like that, but also to see how it is against like other agencies that are in the same sort of realm as you. And so that's kind of a big value add, is like being able to be benchmarked against other firms that have gone through this process.
Yeah. Well, and so I'm just thinking like, obviously having lots of conversations as we come into 2025. I know the time that this episode airs, it'll already be after 2025, but the time of recording, we're at the beginning of November 2024. Yeah. And, a lot of my clients, prospects, people that I'm talking with are thinking about what is our ops platform for 2025 and going forward. And I think a big reason for that is because, I don't know, this is just my take, I could be totally wrong. I think a lot of people in the agency space are feeling like there's kind of a release. I think people are excited about 2025. I think we're expecting some more activity, kind of a little bit of a recovery from what we've had in 2023 and 2024. And so because of that, we're all keyed into do we have the infrastructure in place? And so as I'm seeing these conversations unfold, with these larger products like the Productives and the Teamworks and stuff like that, I don't know if this is the case for Teamwork, but I know for some of these other tools like Parallax, whatever else like that, they have a certain like implementation service that they'll provide as part of their contract. I don't know if they go to the extent of what you're talking about.
No, I think the big differentiator that we always tell people versus like, every software is going to have professional services. And again, with some of them versus others, like if you're a software that's very niche down to a specific industry, like they are going to have context into like your business, but oftentimes they don't. And so it's like every industry has like, even with growth, even with marketing, like every industry has different like ways of marketing that might be better. Obviously, some of it's still like pretty standard, like people buy from people. Like we always kind of know that like events and like real person interaction stuff is going to be great for 2025. But like every industry has a different way of operating. So like if you go with a professional services with a tool like ClickUp, they have good context for how to use ClickUp on the technical side, but not necessarily as much in your use case. So that's like probably the biggest differentiator. In addition, it's a proactive versus reactive thing as well. And so ZenPilot is very proactive. Like it's very much on the consulting side where like we're going to do really good discovery and dig into those underlying issues and build you a solution that's going to solve for that, as opposed to being reactive and you saying, hey, I want to do this, I want to do this, I want to do this. Okay, we'll build that for you. And so we do like a maybe 75 proactive, 25 reactive, where if you want us to connect these tools, we can do that. But like ultimately, we've done this so many times. This is the solution that you really need to achieve what you're trying to accomplish. And so I think that's a big benefit of working with someone that really knows your business. And ultimately, that's why agencies and us are so niched down to a specific ideal customer profile, because that helps you do things over and over and over again, which gets you really good and invested in that specific industry, which makes you a no-brainer when it comes to that, because you know that industry, you don't have to relearn it every time.
Yeah.
You have the process to actually solve for that industry's need.
Well, yeah, you have the use case, but then the other word that comes to my mind is holistic, right? Like one of the things, again, at this previous place I was at, they did initially have a tech implementation partner, but the problem was they were exclusively a tech implementation partner. They weren't really a management consultant, where the differentiation I would say is management consultant sees the whole picture and even considers things like change management. And from what I'm hearing you say, even just looking at your guys' process, I would say you guys are probably more on that management consultant side, where you're looking at the bigger picture and considering the change management, where I don't know that a lot of these other implementation services are doing that.
Yeah. And sometimes it's like, okay, we can set up your business model right now, but is your business model even the right business model? And like sometimes
Bingo.
it's like you might have your agency structured in pods, or you might have it structured this way. And like, is that the right structure for what you're trying to do? So we can put 2 and 2 together to be like, okay, no, you shouldn't necessarily have your team structured in that way. And same thing with like the accountability chart with EOS, like they do right people, right seats. So like we ultimately want to find that as well. And so it is a lot of like agency ops as a whole, like how should your agency be operating? What's a really good way of running your onboarding process versus like a tech that's just going to be like, okay, we can build that automation, we can build that, which sure might work, but like, is that actually the right way of doing things?
Yeah.
Not necessarily.
We never want to start from a place of assuming that the way things have always been is the way that they need to be in the future. Yeah. So I love that point. You've touched on this before, but I want to kind of dive a little bit deeper into it. We know that ClickUp, it's not just another tool. But it is part of ZenPilot's core kind of approach to addressing creating an affordable operations system. So what would you say that makes ClickUp the best choice over some of the pricier alternatives? So we're talking the Teamworks, the Productives, the Forecasts, especially for the agencies that want to grow at a larger scale.
I think ClickUp is great. Again, it's so customizable, but like the biggest things and the reasons that I love it is because the template features within that are way better than any other platform I've used. The ability for you to create templates at basically any level in the hierarchy gives you a lot of flexibility to say, like, do I want to build just a small template for a small service that I do that's very recurring? Do I want to build something for a larger project, like a website project? You're able to do and have all that flexibility for it. In addition, do I want to build like a meeting agenda template? I can do that as well. So there's a lot of different ways that you can build that. Like we even have like client folder templates so that like every time we onboard a new client, we have that whole structure already set up, ready to go with all the automations, the structure, the views, and all that. So like ClickUp does a really good job of that. In addition, the way that their hierarchy works with the views is so good for different agency roles. And so like whatever personality you are, if you want to see something in a list view, if you want to see a Gantt view, if you want to see a timeline view, calendar, whatever it is, they have that. But in addition, it works with a hierarchy where like if I want to see just one project in a Gantt view, I can do that. If I want to see work across just one client, all the projects or deliverables within that client, I can do that. If I'm an account manager, I want to see across a bunch of different clients in one view, one dashboard, I can do that as well. Or if I want to even go a higher level up and see like across what the team is doing across the whole company, I can do that as well. And so like they've really crafted their hierarchy and views so well together that's just perfect for the agency model in terms of the roles that are within the organization. So that's really why I like ClickUp. In addition, just from a workflow and project management perspective, it's so great when it comes to like being able to really hold a team accountable. I think I'll put that there because a lot of tools don't have great ways of like building a dashboard where if I want to see like the habits that the team has, like if I want to see who is like, if we want to communicate all in one platform, we need to close out our notifications each and every day, get down to inbox 0. If you have an inbox that has 500 messages, are you actually checking it and reading it? Probably not. So like you can do that and ClickUp to check that across your team. Some tools you can't. In addition, if you want to see like who's tracked their time or who has a bunch of overdue tasks or who is not completing their tasks on time, all that visibility, again, you have to build it to get that, but it's a lot in ClickUp that gives you the ability to take data and see in a bunch of different ways that I really love the platform for.
So I do, when you were mentioning the inbox zero thing, it made me think about this. I know ClickUp recently has introduced its chat feature.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I should know this, but I haven't seen your guys' YouTube channel for a while. Have you guys put out a video yet about the chat feature in ClickUp?
We have not. I still need to. I've fallen a little bit behind on content, so blame me for that. But we're still testing the waters with it of how because essentially what happens when ClickUp comes with a new feature, a lot of times we'll get like early access to it and be sort of on the beta program. And we like to test that, stress test it, figure out like, okay, where's this going to break? What's the best sort of way of using this for agencies? Because it is great, but there are some like weak points to it that still makes us be like, hey, we still need to use Slack. Like right now, we'll still use Slack primarily because like anytime a deal goes close one in HubSpot, or anytime we have a sales call booked, like all of that is pushed from HubSpot into Slack to get us those notifications for everyone to be aware. So there's a lot of things like that that are not necessarily in ClickUp chat right now, could be in the future. So we would love that so that we can switch completely over, because I am a huge believer in communication and work all happening in one platform. I think that is the fact that they added chat is, I think every platform needs that. There are chat views and things like that, but having sort of this method that they have right now is great. But yeah, so ultimately we like to stress test things, figure it out the best way for the teams that we're working with to use it before we actually go and like implement that.
Yeah, I love that. Well, hopefully, I'm thinking by the time this airs, there'll probably be a couple more months. Maybe you'll be able to release an episode on that. I would say I would love to listen to that episode, because that was actually the very first thing I did. I got the announcement. I was in ClickUp and I saw it, and the first thing I thought of myself is, I wonder if somebody's put a YouTube video out about this, because
I let you down. I'm sorry, Tony.
No, it's okay. It's okay. But we're on the exact same. We have the exact same setup. So we are a ClickUp. We do all of our task management and our project management in ClickUp, and then we do our communication on Slack. In large part, we do Slack because we find that basically all of our clients are on Slack, and they like being able to collaborate there and doing like Slack Connect. And so it's not that I have anything against Slack. I'm just like, I'm of the same mindset as you. It's like, it would be nice to have kind of all in one place, especially if that's all where all the work is happening. Like, why wouldn't we do that in ClickUp?
Yeah. And I would say the biggest thing with that, like, again, I love Slack too. It's easy, especially with client communication, to be very like, I mean, it can turn into text messaging sometimes. So if you want to have like good SLAs or something like that, and sometimes Slack is like, oh, I'm getting messages at like Sunday morning, and like, don't do that. But I like it better than email. But anyways, essentially with that, like, it can be great, but this is where habits come to play, where if your team is finding that they're making habits of like, if we want someone to do something, they keep putting it in Slack, like, hey, can you do this? Can you do that? Like, then teams like fully transition where like all those requests are going through Slack, and then there's no like task or like source of truth, and they're like, did you actually do this?
That's true.
And so then it pushes over to like, now it's all in Slack, and then there's no source of truth. So we always say, like, if it's not in ClickUp, it didn't happen. So like, if you want someone to do something, put a task in ClickUp with a due date in there. Again, that can be like flexible, but like put some sort of prioritization in there for when you want them to do it by. And so you can put the task in there with the context. Always have context. If you don't, what the heck is this task? But if you want to like then call it out, you go to Slack and say, hey, I just created this task for you. Are you able to do this for me? Whatever. So you put that in there after the fact. Like, so get that task in there so that there is a source of truth for that piece of work. Then go to Slack to maybe ping them if this is a higher priority item.
That's a great
idea.
idea.
Like one thing, just in an example of what we've built, because sometimes, again, that habit doesn't always take place. We need it to. That's why we're going to hold the team accountable to it. But like, we have basically created an automation that like anytime someone does put something in Slack like that, you can basically click like a little ClickUp emoji, and then automatically pushes that as a Slack with all the context from that Slack message into ClickUp. So it's there and living, and then you can plan it there. So it's like, yeah, that's where I see a lot of agencies like go too far into Slack, and then they're like, we don't know what we're doing.
Yeah.
That's why.
Oh, I can imagine you probably have even tons more stories. I think one thing I'm really curious about is let's talk about the dark underbelly for a minute, because I think, it does seem in a lot of ways like with the customizability, the potential for better funding for future features. ClickUp seems like kind of a no-brainer, especially when you have a partner like ZenPilot. What are the limitations? Like, what are the things where these are just common pain points and might actually inform somebody that it would be better to go with a teamwork or a productive or a forecast?
Yeah, so the biggest limitation right now is in the reporting side of things, like reporting specifically for agencies. So there is time tracking in there. There is like all the dashboards that you could potentially want on like the team performance, tasks that we're doing, stuff like that. However, when it comes to the profitability measurement of like being able to merge like the cost rates and billable rates and everything like that to the external expenses, whatever it may be, to the actual time that was tracked, and then being able to take all that and understand like which clients are the most profitable for us, which projects are the most profitable. That stuff is not in ClickUp. In addition, there's no capabilities like everyone asks us, like, can you invoice out of ClickUp with the time tracking? You're not able to do that either. In addition, like things like utilization. So the tools that are specifically focused on agencies will prioritize that because agencies need that. And so that's sort of the reason a lot of people might go with an industry specific tool. There are ways, like, again, that we've been like, okay, we'll build our own sort of solution where you can document it all and ClickUp, pull it out in like a Power BI dashboard to get that visibility because agencies ultimately need it. In addition, if you need to do like a Harvest integration, you can do that, where then in Harvest, you can get all those sort of reports and like also get the time tracking data inside of ClickUp. And so like, that's really the main limitations, is those specific things for agencies. I guess the last one I'll say is like, obviously ClickUp, the reason people don't buy into it as much is because it is a daunting tool. There is a lot of different views, a lot of different filters in those views, and a lot of things that can make it confusing. And so again, when you're building it, you need to think about the users. If you go and create a bunch of views and custom fields and things like that, it can be confusing, but there is a way to make it simple for the team. Again, that's training. This is where you need to go to see your work. This is where you need to go to do this. And so it's like, there is an easy way to overcome that, but teams that don't spend time in the training component or the onboarding of their team, obviously it'll be confusing for new users.
Mm-hmm. Totally. So this has come up as a contention, or at least a proposed contention to using something like ClickUp, is because of its customizability, because, like you said, it's a daunting tool. It seems like there will need to be almost like a dedicated admin, somebody who's like basically their full-time job is just propping up the tool. In contrast to something like, those industry specific tools, which have a lot less customizability. And so therefore there's also not as much of a need for administering the tool. In your experience, is that a founded claim that ClickUp will require more admin work than some of these other industry specific tools?
There might be more admin work, but I would dig into the admin work. Like, I would always recommend you have someone, we call it a ClickUp champion, like for whatever tool it is. I mean, especially in project management, like, again, if you don't have the right habits, and like I've seen, like, this is why when we work with teams, we like to be an ongoing partner, because oftentimes people think after the implementation's over, we're good to go. Like, now the system's running on its own. We don't need to have any maintenance. But like, it can be so quick if you're not like have a good cadence, like a daily cadence, weekly, quarterly, whatever it is, for like someone to dive into it and like actually look at the data, look at like, again, is there overdue tasks? Are there tasks that are not assigned? Are there tasks without time estimates? You always want someone going into the platform to making sure that there's some cleanup and there's some audit in the system to make sure it continues to run smoothly. So ClickUp does, although sure that maybe there's more admin time that needs to be done, they do a really good job of helping you build, like, this is what we'll build. We'll build a ClickUp champion dashboard for people that like helps them see, like, is there tasks, again, without assignees? If there's no assignee on task, something's going to slip through the cracks. If there's no due date on a task, something's going to slip through the cracks. So we always want to make sure we're catching those before they might become larger issues in client fires. So regardless, we always tell people that's probably like 20% of someone's time. It doesn't need to be something that takes forever, especially if you build like the system that helps them do it. But like, regardless of the tool, I would say spend time on the admin, or just having someone that's a champion of that tool to help provide that maintenance, help provide that auditing to make sure we are looking at, especially like things like time estimates versus time tracked. Have someone that looks at all that information on a good cadence, because that's going to help you optimize, as we said, that last step later on.
Well, I mean, and to be fair, I think some of these other tools probably have as much of that admin time that's required. I think the problem oftentimes comes is there's an expectation that because I'm paying a premium, therefore this should just be a plug and play solution. I shouldn't need to worry about it. But like, I'm even thinking about a client of mine who uses Harvest, because a lot of our clients use Harvest. And there isn't an automated update, or even just like a constant check to see, are the rates that we have in our payroll platform equal to the rates that we're using, like what we're actually paying people, is that actually equal to what we are putting out as our cost rate in Harvest? And lo and behold, it's not always kept up to date. So that's some admin work that they haven't been doing.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's always good to continue to look at that, to help. Like, you always want to, a lot of these systems, you're going to get a ton of data out of, especially if you're tracking time, especially if you're closing tasks. And so like, you're opening up a whole like world of data. which is awesome. Like, I mean, with the AI world nowadays, you can put data into something and have it like actually give you some good insights without you having to do all the work. But like ultimately you're creating something that's going to give you really good insights that as long as you know how to use it, as long as you know how to sort of groom it, then you're going to get like, you're going to help really scale the business forward because everything is going to be data driven decisions. So like if we want to know like how much should we price this project out, I have that data in here. Again, I need to make it visible and be able to see it. But like you want to take that data and do something with it to know like, okay, maybe I need to increase my price here because we're not making much margin. And so again, I had one agency that I was working with that like once they actually built the system, they had like their main niche, and then they had like a side niche that they were kind of working with. In their main niche, they realized like they had great relationships with those clients. They were going smoothly, but they realized like, oh, we're not actually making any money on that. We're actually making way more money on our side niche. And so they like shifted their agency to that side niche and now they're much more profitable. And so like they didn't know that because they weren't tracking it time. They weren't like didn't have a system to catch that data. And so once they got it, it was big for the agency.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. And you're speaking my language, talking about margins and tracking profitability. This is great. I love it. I love it. I love it. Well, I want to ask one last question before we try to wrap up here. And this has to do just more a forward-looking statement. I know I mentioned it before. You know, we're recording this beginning of November. It's probably going to come out sometime early 2025. But you know, as agencies have just dealt with a really, really hard 2023 and 2024, and there's a kind of a general sense in which 2025 is looking a little bit more promising, at least the take that I'm taking at the moment. What are some suggestions that you have for those agencies that are looking towards 2025 or in 2025 and kind of seeing some of that growth? Like what would be some suggestions you have to prepare for the growth, particularly when it comes to balancing, you know, affordability of solutions with operational success?
Yeah, I'll say two things because I do want to give like my perspective on one thing that you can do for agencies in 2025 that's not necessarily on the operational side. But like I guess I was just talking to an agency that he's being very proactive. I was like trying to figure out like what's actually broken for him because he's doing well, pacing well, got a good MRR, and he's continuing to grow. But he's like, I'm just trying to be proactive. Like the system's not broken yet, but I'm trying to double in size by the end of 2025. So now is the time for me to build a system. I think I have something. Again, there's not anything right now that feels like it's broken. Work's not slipping through the cracks, but I know I need to bring on 10 more people for me to get to the spot I'm trying to get to. And so he's like, I know I need to build a system now so that like he's trying to go on paternity leave. He's trying to go on vacation. So like for agencies, I would say like, even if nothing is broken right now, try to stress test it or think about like, if I brought on 10 more people, could I actually onboard them and get them working the system well without things starting to slip through the cracks? Could I actually delegate work to someone new coming on board? Like whatever it is, maybe you're trying to hire someone that's entry level. Maybe you're trying to hire someone that's offshore, whatever it is, like think about creating a system, getting your processes for how you like, don't spend so much time on building very detailed SOPs if they're just going to live in a Google Drive. If you have that in there, that's great. I would spend less time building out those being super detailed unless it's a very strict process. Spend more time connecting that to the work that actually needs it so that people don't have to go find those. Make sure that's right in front of people's faces when they actually need to do that work, because ultimately that's going to be what gets the process followed by all. So if I had to give one piece of advice, make the process live where the work gets done. Spend time recording a Loom video. You could take that Loom video, take the transcript, plug it into Claude or something like that to get like a good overview of those step-by-step process. You can use a tool like Scribe, which I find amazing to like get those documentation down in a much easier way, and then just embed that into the tasks that actually need them. Because I think ultimately when you can systematize your business like that, that's what's going to help you scale if you're trying to scale in 2025. But also, I think the biggest thing for growth, because you found us through YouTube, so I wanted to share this. For people that maybe are not growing right now, or just like one easy marketing tactic, if you're a founder, or like I'm not a founder, but I'm just kind of on the growth side, starting a YouTube channel, if you don't have one, even if it's just podcast episodes, but starting a YouTube channel is going to be probably one of the biggest growth drivers that you can have in 2025. The reason being, Tony, as you said, you watched our video, and now every time you go to YouTube, you probably see more of our YouTube videos. So you have retargeting built in. Like it's already in there. Someone watches your channel, they watch one video because they discover you there. Now, every time they go to YouTube, which is a massive search channel, they're going to see your videos over and over and over again. You're going to nurture that relationship. Tony got to know me before we even had a conversation because he's saw me going through ClickUp and doing all that stuff. And so like you really build a relationship that doesn't even really exist before you even talk to that person. And so that you get amazing content out there. People can see your process for how you think, process for what you're doing. They get a lot of insights in there. Again, the retargeting is built in. In addition, we get paid on YouTube, not all that much, but like if I want to spend money like promoting my YouTube channel, I already get paid from YouTube to add to that marketing budget. So that's another great reason to do it. In addition, now I have so much content out there. People come to a sales call and they're like, hey, I've watched like hundreds of your videos. I started building this by myself. Now I need help. And I'm sort of bought into your process because I've heard you talk over and over and over again. So it's like, spend a lot of time building out a YouTube channel because it's going to be so great. Again, retargeting built in. You get paid for it once you get to a certain point to fund your marketing budget. And it just builds trust I've heard people call this a trust recession. That's not my quote, but that's what other people have said. Like, again, people don't necessarily trust companies. People want to buy from people. That's how you build trust with an audience. Over and over and over again, they watch a ton of your YouTube content and then come to a sales call. They're like, hey, I'm bought in. What's the price? Let's go.
Yeah, that's so good. It does a great job nurturing. Yeah, and there's something, like you said, there's something about being able to develop those relationships en masse. That's very unique about YouTube. I know for me personally, like I'm much more likely to buy if I have that place where I can go in and engage with them on my own time in not a pressured way. I think that sometimes people get a little bit like, you sign up for their newsletter or something like that, and then you just kind of get like spammed a little bit. But when you can go on your own time and consume some of the content that's being put out there, especially in video format, very, very good. That's excellent advice, Jeff. Obviously, people can go find you guys on YouTube. That's just the ZenPilot YouTube channel. But where else can people go maybe to follow you specifically, or even just ZenPilot in general?
Yeah, I mean, obviously YouTube is our biggest platform. I'm most active on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn, Jeff Cypher, you'll find me there. That's probably where, again, I engage the most time. I had a Twitter at one point, deleted it. Don't really do the other social platforms right now. It's for the best. But LinkedIn is definitely the place to find me there. Otherwise, jeff@zenpilot.com. Shoot me an email or go to our website. I'm the little chat bot in the right-hand corner. You can get in touch with me there as well.
I love it. Jeff, thank you so much. Today has been very insightful. I'm learning a lot of things. I love your guys' 1-3-5 approach. And hopefully our listeners, as they've listened to this, have gotten a lot. And I would even say, if you're considering a project management shift, at the very least, give ZenPilot a chance.
Yeah, let's have a conversation, whether or not it's just me asking questions and diving into things. But appreciate it, Tony. It's been great to be on this podcast and good to see everyone.
And thank you to our listeners. If you found value in our episode today, please leave us a review and tell your friends about us. If you're interested in being a guest on our show, as a digital agency owner, or maybe somebody with insights that can help digital agencies grow, head over to our website to learn more at equip.com/podcast guest. That's ACCQUIP.com/podcast guest.